With Christmas being only a week away, I'm sure that most of us have got our Christmas preparations well underway, whether that is meeting up with friends and family, Christmas parties, if you're still allowed to go, wrapping, presents, and all of the fun things that normally happen at this time of year. But perhaps this year, more than any other, I'm aware of the sheer number of people for whom Christmas is not a happy time of the year. A number of us have lost loved ones over the past few years. Some of us have lost friends. And for the second year in a row, at least in the UK, a number of us might be impacted by government restrictions and possibly even within our own communities. I am a psychologist, a cognitive psychologist. I research JDM, which is judgment and decision making. I am particularly interested in people's emotions, how they respond to feedback, and general well-being. And so I am acutely aware of some of the challenges a number of people are facing this year. And it's come to my attention, the sheer scale of it recently. Possibly because of my interests, I often see a biased sample. I often come across people who are struggling, who are facing challenges. And so, with that being the case, it's sometimes easy to think that maybe it's not quite as widespread as you think. But given that suicide rates are higher this year, record highs, and the number of people who are on their own, not just older people, a lot of younger people are finding themselves in very isolated, lonely situations, I thought it might be a good idea to do a video. This is very last minute, no makeup, no lighting, no proper microphone. Not a great start, actually, for an early video, but I thought it was actually too important an issue not to do a video and to let my vanity get in the way of saying something that might help people. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not saying you have to follow anything. These are just tips that you might like to consider if you or someone you know is not looking forward to the Christmas. The first thing I would say is if you have any friends who are on their own, you might like to try to include them in some of your events. Not necessarily on Christmas Day, but if you're able to have any gatherings, it might be really nice to include them. A lot of people you might find are a little bit too proud or self-conscious to say that they're going to be on their own. They might not want to say that they're feeling lonely, that they don't know how to spend the day. And quite often you find people don't want to become a burden to others. Even though they're not a burden, that can be how they feel. So what I usually do, I check in with people, I use WhatsApp, I will Skype them or use Zoom. I try to include people in online activities. So I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm a fan of online escape rooms and things like that. But there are lots of events, some are free. It's just connecting with people. It doesn't have to be for a huge amount of time. But if you can't see them, at least use the technology, the amazing technology we have available to keep in touch with them. It's also worth seeing, whilst it's their private information, if they're not feeling well, or if they're feeling a bit lonely and isolated, they might have told you that in confidence. But if they haven't, it might be worth seeing whether anyone else in your friendship group would be able to check on them as well, or at least to wish them a happy Christmas and to see how they're doing. I would say that's particularly important if restrictions are impacting people, even going to church, for example. You might not have friends doing that, but that's an example of where a social connection might be impacted. One other thing that is a big one since the pandemic started, since lockdown started last year, one of the main areas that has been affected is domestic abuse. Very, very sadly, I'm going to talk about that. I know it's a triggering topic. It's not a pleasant topic to talk about, but it's very real. And I think not talking about it is actually ignoring a systemic problem that's not going to go away. So there's no point pretending it's not there. But similarly, if you have been impacted by domestic abuse, or it's a topic you don't want to hear about, you might want to skip forward to later in the video, and I'll put a timestamp below. For those of you who are still here, domestic abuse, as I'm sure you're aware, can take many different forms. I am very keen to point out, because a lot of people always think with domestic abuse that it is physical, and of course a lot of it is, but you also have psychological or emotional abuse. And a lot of people also think that it's the case that the abuser is male, the victim is female. And that may well be the case, but it's not always the case. Quite often you might be looking at the case where you have a male victim, you may be looking at same-sex relationships, you may be looking at a different dynamic within the house, like a parent-child relationship. It can be very difficult to know how to navigate it and how to get involved, if at all. And I'm going to focus specifically here on things you can do if you have a friend who might be affected, an adult who is experiencing issues with their partner. I don't think it's really my area to talk about children, and I think if you are suspecting that a child is in any form of danger, if it's physical or psychological, you must take action on that. You can't leave that, because children are obviously vulnerable. It's a little bit different with adults, because they are really consenting to be in that relationship. You might very much disagree with the fact that they're in that relationship, but that is their decision to make. It is not your call. So a few things I would say with this: if you have a friend who is in a situation, you may well find that they don't want to open up to you. You may see that they have bruises. You might notice changes in their behaviour or the way they're presenting themselves. Maybe they're covering up more than usual. Maybe they've started apologising a lot. Or maybe if it's someone you know well, you're able to pick up on subtle clues, things that might be red flags to you. If that's the case, it's difficult to know whether you can confront them or not. And I would say it very much depends on your dynamic. It is not uncommon for victims to try to protect the person abusing them. And again, I'm trying to keep it to victims and abusers rather than using pronouns, because one of the things I always say is, men can be victims too. Even though that might not be the majority of cases, I just like to keep that quite neutral. And if they don't open up to you, don't force them. They're not ready to share. They might feel backed into a corner. And the thing I would say is just to let them know that you're there, so that you can say to them, if you're having a hard day, why don't you send me a text? Why don't you give me a call? They may well not do that, but you are giving them the option. You're giving them a point of contact that if things go badly, they know you're there. On the other side, they might start to tell you things. Now, hard though it is, if they tell you things, you have got to try to stay as calm as you can. You can be a ball of rage inside, or you might be so upset you want to cry and you have to stop yourself crying. The reason you have to hide it, they're not going to think you don't care. It's because if you react badly, from their perspective, you're someone who's reacted badly, possibly the way their abuser reacts, an exaggerated emotion, they might not know what to do with that. And if you're angry and you say, I'm going to challenge this person, how dare they treat you like that, that's actually going to be quite threatening to them, and they'll regret telling you. And if they need to tell you again in future, they'll think twice about it. So it's really important that you stay as calm and as collected and as non-judgmental as you can. If you are able to control your facial expressions and your body language so that you seem, as though you're listening to them, you're taking everything on board. Importantly, that you're not judging them for staying in that relationship. That's very important. And that you're there to offer advice or to listen, but make sure you're doing what they want. Unsolicited advice may not always go down well. And even if you feel that they have to leave that relationship, and I'm someone who has the belief that if you're in, or if someone else is in, an abusive relationship, the thing to do is to leave that relationship. There's almost certainly going to be a very, very strong trauma bond between the victim and their abuser. They know almost certainly that they are not in a normal relationship. You're telling them or saying, you have to leave, you have to do this, you can't do that, you're going to leave now. That's not going to help. The trauma bond is going to be stronger than that. And you need to respect that. You're there to help them, not to put your own personal beliefs or suggestions or what they have to do next onto them. That also won't work well. It's a huge step for a victim of abuse to open up to anyone. Part of that is due to the fact that victims often have a concern that they're not going to be believed. That is a very sad reflection of our society. But sadly, it's something that exists, it's there, it's commonly felt among victims. So make sure you don't say, but whoever it is, male or female, they seem so nice. They've always been nice to me. They're so sociable. They seem so nice in a group. Most of them do. That's how so many abusers go under the radar, because they do seem so nice. Because you wouldn't think Ted did this or Jane left and did that. So make sure that it's clear that you believe them. One way to do that when you're listening to them with whatever they tell you is to mirror things back at them, so that they really feel that you're not just listening, you're understanding, you're really processing what they're telling you. If you're interested to know more about mirroring someone, there's some great lectures online by Chris Voss, and that might help you if you're not sure. Obviously, I'm sure you know how to listen to your friend, but if you want to do it in a way, if you're thinking, oh, if my friend told me this, I'd go crazy, I'd want to scream at whoever's hurting them, then this way, this method of responding to them might be helpful to you. It's something that I have listened to, and I think whenever friends have opened up to me in situations, it's definitely helped. So I just recommend that for what it's worth. The lectures are entirely free, so it's accessible to anyone. The other thing I would say, a lot of people think tough love is the way to go. And with some individuals, it may be. It may be a great thing to go for tough love. Not in my experience. I think saying to someone, if you don't leave X, then I will stop talking to you. I don't want to hear about this. Stop complaining about it if you're not going to do anything about it. I won't be your friend anymore unless you leave, whoever it is, or that situation. That can be very damaging. It's taken the victim a huge amount of courage to come forward, a huge amount. And for them to have additional conditions placed on them, even though I imagine they are said with the greatest love and the greatest support, it really can backfire. Trauma bonds are very strong, very strong. You may be their best friend, the trauma bond can still be stronger. If you are interested to read about trauma bonding, there are many peer-reviewed journal articles on it, partly because the brain functions differently. So if you're really interested in neuroscience, then there are many journal articles. If you're interested more from a layman's perspective, even a book like The Body Keeps the Score is actually a very accessible way to learn about trauma bonding. So that's something that if you're interested, you might like to think about it, because so many people say, I don't understand why X is with Y when Y treats them so badly. And of course, if you are in the majority of people thinking that, it's probably a good thing. It means you've never experienced trauma. So I understand that mentality, but once you've seen enough people suffering or enough people who've been in abusive relationships, you start to think a little bit differently. It is important that you check in on them. It is important that you do so in a very subtle way. They may or may not have access to their phones. They may or may not be able to have their phones on. They may have to have their phones on silent. They may not be the ones responding to you. I think it's an easy thing to assume that your friend or whoever it is going to be the only person who has access to their phone. And that, I would say, is often not the case. Even if they're the only ones with their phone at that moment, they may have their phone checked periodically. If that is the case, I would recommend that you set up a sort of code with your friend so that you can check that they're all right and it's unlikely to be spotted by their abuser. It could be something stupid, like you might say to them, oh, I've burnt the potatoes again. You know, something that's really not going to cause much suspicion. And they might do a particular reply that is in line with their character, in line with something that they would say. And that will let you know whether or not they're all right. You might need to have a plan in place that you discuss with them in terms of when you would persevere with contacting them, when they might be in trouble. I know these are horrid things to be discussing, but bear in mind that because it is so hard for victims to speak and to share their situation with anyone, you might be the only person they're talking to, the only person they're turning to. That's a huge responsibility, and if it's someone you care about deeply, you're going to want to make sure that they're okay. And that is why it's useful to have these mechanisms in place. Make sure that you don't send them anything that couldn't be read by someone else. That even goes for Christmas parties. You know, if people have a glass of wine and they say, oh, you know, tell X that if they harm you, I'm going to come over there and sort them out. That could actually put the person you're trying to help in quite a dangerous situation. So sadly, there's a lot of thought that has to go into this. If it gets to a point whereby you need to help your friend to get out, maybe they would be able to stay with you. If not, you might want to reassure them that you can get them alternative accommodation. That might be in a hotel. Maybe it's with another family member. It might be that you give them cash so that they're not using their credit card, so that they can't be tracked. You might want to make sure that they've got no location tracking apps on their phone, because sometimes if you're with someone who's really panicking and they're not thinking clearly, they might forget that they've got their location being shared with the person they're in a relationship with. Things like that. There's a lot of planning and a lot of preparation that has to come with this, but there's a huge reward if you are able to be there for someone emotionally, if you're able to support them, if you're able to care for them. Christmas is really one of these times whereby emotions can often run high, people have a lot to drink, people don't always exhibit good judgment. And possibly more so than ever before, domestic abuse is becoming really problematic. And it's because of that, as I say, I'm just sharing a couple of quick scenarios. I don't intend to bore you all evening. If there are any other things you would be interested to know about, then let me know and I can add any other information. There are always charities, you've always got the police if it comes to it. There are many ways that you can help someone. But I would say one of the key things is to make sure that they know that they don't deserve it and that they deserve better. A lot of people in these relationships where you have these dynamics, they feel so worthless. They think that they're of such low standing, of such low status, that even if they had the option and you said, well, dial 999 or whatever the emergency number is where you are, a number of them wouldn't, because they might think even if it were an emergency, they wouldn't deserve the help. And that is a very, very sad realization. And it's a really shocking reflection of society that we have people who are in situations like that. So it is a very valuable sort of support that you are providing. There are many online charities, online support groups, even that if you're supporting someone who's in an abusive situation, there are places and people who can support you as well. And it can be tiring if you're helping someone. It is very, very worthwhile. I don't think you would ever regret it. You have peace of mind, and also if you have a friend that you think is in a situation like that, you're going to be anxious anyway about their well-being. That if you're able to check in with them at fairly regular intervals, you've got peace of mind that everything's going well. I really hope that you are all spending the holiday season with people you love and the people you wish to be with, or that you're spending the Christmas however you're choosing to spend it, and that it's not being dictated by other circumstances. As I say, I hope you don't know anyone who's going to be impacted or affected by this video, but if you do, I hope it may have given you a couple of ideas that you might not have thought about otherwise. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and I will be back again soon. Next time with lighting, a microphone, makeup if you're lucky. Bye. I don't think, has that stopped? That's not even stopped. This is going so well.